Конечно, мог бы выступать на своем новом русском языке, но поскольку зал гордится своим знанием английского, было бы плохо, неправильно выступать на русском. Причем возникнут неточности, которые пойдут сразу по интернету. Поэтому я прошу прощения. Давно отвык от русской речи. Поэтому я буду на английском языке, но как руководство сказала, конечно, вопросы на любом языке. Понятно, да? Извиняюсь. Okay, so this is my copy, and so I like to leave tonight with this copy, but before I leave, I'll pass it around for those who haven't seen it yet. So, who is so stupid to decide to write yet another book about Stalin? It is crazy. People said to me, maybe I'm making a joke to propose yet another book about Stalin. And so maybe they're correct, but I'll explain to you my thinking, and you see. So the main thing I came to tell you tonight, the main thing, I'm going to say other things, but the main thing, the main thing I came to tell you is that it's a book about Russia's place in the world. It's not only or primarily a book about Stalin. It's a book about Russian power in the world. And so people ask me, why is the book so big? And the answer is because the subject is like that. It is about the grand, tragic, complex history of Russian power in the world. Before Stalin got into office, and then after, once he was in office. And so the book is based primarily original source material, and that's true for all of the episodes. It's true of the history of Stolypin period, it's true of pre-Stalin as well as the Stalin period. To go back and look at the most reliable information and to try to capture Russian power in the world. The second thing the book is about is Stalin's power in Russia, which is important both before he gets power to see what he inherits and what possibilities and limits there are to his rule, and then once he is in power, what type of choices he will make, what type of decisions he will make and why. So this Russian power in the world. Привет. Сюда. So that's why there's a lot of the book before Stalin is in General Secretary of the party. Long part of the book before that. Okay, so this is the most important thing, Russian power in the world, which is a very big subject, and especially for American audience, English language audience, is not as well known maybe as it is to you. So you have to remember, this is written in English for American audience about the question of Russia. It's not easy to interest the American audience in a big book about Russia, and so one has to do it in a way that captures the imagination of American and maybe British readers. Okay, so much for the main message. Now for some discussion about how I decided to write the book and then what's in the book. So far so good. My accent is not so difficult to understand, I hope. Don't know. It's okay? Yes. Yeah, all right. So, as you know, I wrote the book about Stalin phenomenon, but from street level, from inside the society, looking from the vantage point of everyday life, how it was possible. And so that book took a single town, and the town was large enough, but not too large to be a case study for the whole phenomenon. So then I thought I will do a study of the whole regime not just one town. But how is this really possible? Because you see, the Communist Party archives are declassified, more and more material from Communist Party archives. But what about the military? What about the police? Because it is a military police dictatorship. And the party is very important, but only party materials is insufficient to write a serious book about Stalin phenomenon from the point of view of the regime. But we had an unusual event, which is Dmitry Volkogonov. And you know Volkogonov, I don't have to explain to you. His team of researchers gathered materials from all different archives, including military archive, where he was director. And they made copies of materials, and then they gave them to the United States. So there are 55 microfilms of Dmitry Volkogonov papers in the United States. And these are military and police archives. So the materials that he used in his books, and some things which he didn't use, and some things he didn't understand. But he deposited all of this material in the US. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I read through the Volkogonov materials, the 55 microfilms. Now remember, it's because there's many materials from the party archive that are now open, Communist Party archive, but I'm looking for police military materials, which I found in Volkogonov, and I decided it could be possible to write a book about the whole regime now. Primarily because Volkogonov gathered so many materials into one place, made it easy for me. Now, I apply myself to go work in the KGB archives. I apply myself to go work in many different archives. And привет. But I was denied access. They say no. I come with official papers. I come with passport, everything necessary, and they say, no, you can't work in them. I keep trying every year to get into some of these archives, and sometimes say yes, a little bit, and mostly no. But something else happened after Volkogonov. And this was publication of document collections. Юрьевич, опоздал, как всегда. And the publication of the document collections has been, as you know, massive. There are now enough document collections of police and military materials to fill this room from Soviet period. German, Russian, German-Soviet relations, 1920s. 3 volumes, 700 pages each volume, right? And so while I was deciding to do this, came the published document avalanche. It was very significant. And so not only Volkogonov, which was my beginning, but many, many more materials. At the same time, a third stream or river of materials came forward, which was the books in Russian by historians living here, so-called secondary sources or history books here. And this also was a big avalanche, and in these books there are many citations to the secret archives, police and military, and there are also many references that you could follow up. So just to give you an example, Plekhanov, Alexander Plekhanov, for example, very large book about counterintelligence, 1920s. And this book, if you use it, it unlocks the key to the document collections. Because if you read the document collections, it says the number 1, number 4, number 5. And you say, what about number 2 and 3? Why don't they publish these in the document collections? Well, it turns out that somebody was sitting on them and they came out in their book. So anyway, it was a fortunate circumstance, beginning with Volkogonov, and then with the document collections, and now with the history book. Now you're going to tell me that this is silly, that so many good books could be coming out in Russian history in Russian. And if you go to Mysnitskaya and you go into the bookstore, you see it's full of bad books, especially about Stalin. Very bad books. Beria diaries, Stalin's mother diaries, Stalin was poisoned and killed. These kind of books. That's what the store is full of. But there are many other books which are not in that bookstore, which come out very small tirage, as you call it, and those books are often excellent books. And I have very big collection of those books, and so do the libraries in the United States. So it's now possible, in my view, because of publications here in Russia, to do real history using police and military archives that was not possible before. Now, it's a little bit dangerous. Sometimes on the internet, documents are fake. Sometimes Bereria's diaries published, they are not real. They're fake Bereria's diaries. There are no such diaries that we know of. So one has to be a little bit careful. But also we live in an epoch of scanning. And so it turns out that if you're friends with people or you can meet some people, it's possible that they might show you something that they found in the archive. This is especially true of those archives that are not cooperating. I won't name, for example, Foreign Policy Archive, but some archives do not cooperate so easily. They make it very difficult. But the scanning, I have many scans of documents I did myself, which are now classified again, and I cannot see them. But I can show them to the archives. I can show the scan that I have. So you know this better than most people because you work in this area. But I'm just saying how it came about that I could write such a book. It was because of materials that came forward, not because of me. So the book is actually a tribute, homage, to the history and the documents being published here in Russia. People don't understand this, but it was necessary to synthesize a great deal of material. And I have a slogan, you probably laugh if I tell you, but my slogan is, I will not be out-researched. Nobody will out-research me. Maybe they will, but that's my slogan, and I try to live up to that. So I did a lot of research and tried to bring it together in a way that makes sense, both narrative and interpretation. But I'm benefiting from everything that other people brought forward. And you will see in the endnotes, the references are clear. Sometimes I read the document original in the Foreign Policy Archive 7 years ago. And 3 years ago, a book came out, published book, with reference to the document. So I changed my reference from the original document to the book with parenthesis, original document in parenthesis, to show that I read it also. But I acknowledge the book that was written published before mine was published. So I'm very serious to say that this is a celebration, tribute to the work here. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that's published here. I don't take the same interpretation sometimes, but I am indebted, dependent on the work that was done here. Now, the work that was done here is very scattered. Sometimes the book will come out in Kazan, 100 copies. Sometimes it comes out, Birobidzhan, 50 copies. So it's a full-time occupation to track all of this material, which I have been doing. So I have a very big personal library of these kinds of books. And every time I come on a trip, I go home with probably 700 books, leaving Russia, usually. But I get them from all over the country. People help me. They bring them to Moscow, and then I take them home from here. Yeah, okay. So much for how I got started. Now, what is the argument of the book, or what is the presentation that's in the book? Right? Here I will mention 3 points only, and then we go for discussion and questions, if that's okay. This book is 739 pages of text, then of notes after that. But one of my friends said that it reads like only 620. So, not to be intimidated. He tried to intimidate you, tell you 950, only first volume. This kind of intimidation doesn't scare us. Reads like 620, so maybe
Only.
2 nights. That is 1 year and 2 nights, and it's done. Right, Gilbert?
10 weeks in my class
Okay.
of torture.
Okay. So the first argument in the book is what I call a geopolitics first year, first class, or geopolitics 101. This is a little bit simplified, but I'll tell you anyway. So the British and the French fought a war for global supremacy, more than 100 years. And surprisingly, British won. And by 1815, British is dominant global power. It's a big surprise because the British, small country, small state, small population. France, a big country, big population, big state. But the French don't know how to do fiscal relations too well. The king loses his head over this problem in France. The British invent national bank, national debt, customs service, and their state is small but efficient. It's a brilliant victory, not only of the fiscal part, but the military part too. Anyway, British are dominant power 1815 for sure, after more than 100 years war with the French. On and off. Not exactly 100 years, but on and off. But then 2 ruptures in world history. First rupture is Bismarck unification of Germany. Creates new power on the continent. Most dynamic continental power, the new Germany after 1870s, right? So it's a biography of Stalin, but I begin with Bismarck, which is difficult for most reviewers to understand, but I hope you're going to see why. So Bismarck unification of Germany, 1870s. Meiji restoration in Japan, also 1870s. Meiji restoration is not a new country, but it's consolidation of Japanese nation. Also dynamic economy after this, and also aggressive foreign policy. So, in the 1870s, 2 ruptures in world history, Germany and Japan. Both flanking Russia. One on the western side of Russia, one on the eastern side of Russia. So the whole world is different now. Still British global power, main power, number 1 power, but now dynamic Germany and dynamic Japan. So this is the world that Stalin is born into. He's born 1878. So he's born into Bismarck unification of Germany, Meiji restoration in Japan, and later in life he will have to deal with these questions. Before him, Tsarist regime tries to deal, Witte, Stolypin, right, tries to deal with these questions before Stalin. So these 2 ruptures, British dominated world, Germany and Japan. This is geopolitics 101. There's one more piece, actually 2 more pieces I should say. Once again, a little bit simplified, but this is one of the arguments of the book, so that's why I tried to shorten it for you. So 2 other pieces. China goes down right at the same time as the British rise. It is unrelated. It's coincidence that it happens at the same time as the British rise, but the British will take advantage of China. The Qing have a very bad fiscal military state, not as bad, worse than the French compared to the British. The British take advantage of the Qing, but China goes down very unusually right in the same period. So informal imperialism, or a power that is pushed around by the great powers. The other thing is victory of North in the U.S. Civil War. Also very important in world history. The Southern economy, the Southern model for U.S. Southern system is destroyed and replaced by Northern domination. And already by 1880s, the U.S. is the number 1 economy in the world by size. And by 1900, U.S. is 25% of world economy. But it's only 5% of world trade, so it's not the global power yet, but the potential is there. So we say that the U.S. is looming over the world system. Looming. Not yet ruling, but looming. And Stalin eventually, later, in the volume 2, will have to deal with this question. But more immediately is Germany and Japan in the British-dominated world. And the U.S. is coming, but not there yet, and China went down. So this is Geopolitics 101. Why is this important? It's important because modernization is not sociological process. You're going to forgive me, I hope. Modernization is geopolitical process. So the most powerful countries have certain attributes, and if you don't have them, you're going to fall prey, you're going to become a colony of the most powerful countries. So, for example, if they have a steel and you don't have steel, forget it. They have ships, they have a navy, you don't have a navy. They have engineering schools, you don't have engineering schools. They have mass politics, where lower orders are incorporated into the polity and you don't. They're going to crush you. They're going to come to your door, uninvited, and they're going to say, oh, we are in charge of your country now. Thank you. No invitation. They're just going to show up. This is modernization. Either you modernize in response, or you fall victim to the great powers. And so this Geopolitics 101 connected to modernization as geopolitics, right? Modernization doesn't happen in some natural process. It's very difficult to achieve, but it's not a choice. It's forced on other countries by the great powers. If you cannot match the great powers, you cannot ask them, please go home. It's not fair. You come to my country, you tell me how to live. That's unfair. That's not right. I didn't invite you. You have no such option. They come without invitation. And they control your ports, and they control your railroads, or they build your railroads, and they conscript your population, and they take you over as they see fit or as they're capable. So here we have a story of how is Russia going to modernize in the brutal, unsentimental international system. That's the first most important argument of the book. Russian fiscal military state under the Tsars is very successful. Very successful. Russia is able to modernize and compete in the international system. This is very important. Russian state is a success, not a failure. To you, maybe this is not news, but to American audience, they are shocked to read this. It doesn't mean Russian state is complete success, because the aspirations of the Russian state are greater than the capabilities of the Russian state. It wants to be a number one great power, but it doesn't have capabilities to be a number one great power. So the ambitions exceed the capabilities. And this is the tragedy. If the ambitions could be lowered, Russia could be a second great power, or even a third great power, but it's unable to come to grips. It's unable to recognize that the other powers are stronger, and it tries to raise itself at very high cost, very, very high cost, in order to be in the very top rank. You could have a different approach. You could try alliance system. You could try stay outside the international battles between the great powers. Russia, unfortunately, gets involved in the antagonism between Germany and Britain, as well as has its own ambitions, and you know what happens. But this is going to now be inherited by Stalin. Is Russia going to be a great power? Is Russia going to be first-rank great power? Is Russia going to have unique institutions and be distinctive, so-called providential power or special mission in the world? Right? All of this we see in the book through the Tsars period, and then what is going to be the Soviet approach. And of course you know the answer to these questions. We live now under the same problem. Exactly the same problem now. Slightly different circumstances, of course, because there are many new countries, Ukraine, Poland, etc. But it's a similar dynamic of Russian power in the world, which, as I told you, is the main subject of this book. Okay, so that's the first point. I could talk more about this question, But this is a book about power, especially geopolitics. The second point, I'm going to do 3, remember, so now is the second point. The second point is institutions. So I only write about geopolitics, institutions, and ideas. Every book I write, this is what it's about. I don't recognize my work in the reviews of my work because I don't think it's accurately characterized, but just for my purposes, what I think I'm doing is geopolitics, institutions, and ideas together as the package for power, right? So now on the institutions question. So this is a fantastic story of Tsarist state versus Tsarist autocracy. Autocracy is a failure. The state is a success. But the contradiction between the regular state and the autocracy will end up destroying both. And you will get the destruction of the Russian state, not in the war, because the Russian state survives most of the war, but in the revolutionary process. So tracing this Russian state through the revolutionary process, destruction, and then re-emergence on the other end through revolution and civil war. This is a very big part of the book. There's a theory of revolution in the book. There's a theory of state building based upon the Russian example, but of course comparisons to other countries. How institutions are created. Sometimes not intentionally created, but arise from circumstances, and then you have to live with the circumstances. The best example of this is a commissar, right? The model of the Soviet state. Where does it come from? It comes from civil war, the same dynamic as provisional government, inherit Tsarist officers. They have military expertise, but you don't trust the politics because they took an oath to the Tsar. Are they going to serve the revolution? So next to the officer, you put the commissar, expert and party member, right? This dualism, you have the state and you have the party. In the schools, the teachers are inherited from Tsarist period. They can teach maybe, but can you trust the politics? Commissar or party cell inside the school. Everywhere, the dualism, the shadowing, expert and commissar, right? Now, eventually, all of the experts are going to be party members. And so you're not going to have division anymore because officer corps, state official, school teachers going to be produced by the Soviet system and going to join the party. But the dualism of the party state, duplication, remains all the way through to the end. It's an artifact of revolutionary process. So when I go to the archive, I have to go to party archive and state archive separately. And you could say, oh, one was not important, but both were important. But this redundancy, this dualism was not planned from the beginning, but it is an artifact of the revolution. So state making, the making of the state, the making of the institutions, how the place is going to be governed, is in part a product of the revolutionary process and civil war, not always intentions. Right? So I trace in detail, very close detail, where the institutions came from, how they formed, and how they operate in reality. This is a big part of the book. I could give more detail, but maybe this is enough on the second point. Now to the third point, the ideas. So most of you know that in English language treatment of Stalin regime and Stalin personally, it's all about he pursues personal power. Everything he does is just to advance his own power. He's like some kind of dekan fakulteta. Oh. Except not everyone, except some exceptions. Exceptions. Very important. I talk about myself, not the exceptions. So everybody tries to argue that Stalin Even collectivization was only for his personal power to defeat Bukharin and Rykov, right? So this is a lie. It's completely wrong. Stalin had beliefs. He had deep convictions. He was a man of Marxist-Leninist beliefs. Now, I don't share his beliefs. They are not something that I am sympathetic to, but I have empathy for his beliefs. I accept that he has beliefs. I don't have the same beliefs as liberals in the United States either, but I respect that they have these beliefs, even if I don't share them. So it's necessary to prove for the skeptical reader that Stalin had belief system, where these beliefs come from, what are these beliefs, and how they work in practice. Because, of course, he's pursuing personal power. Of course he's doing that. But he's also got the convictions that are very deep. It's not the contradiction to have both, to pursue personal power. And one of the things I show in the book is risking of personal power for beliefs, which even my enemies acknowledge is in the book, which was very surprising to me. And I still can't believe it myself. But anyway, where did the beliefs come from and what are the beliefs? So let's remember that Stalin was a success in school. He was a good student. His teachers liked him. He had good marks or grades. He sang in the choir. Even when he got to the seminary, he was a good performing student. So he was on a path to success. Through education, he could expect some type of successful place in the society. Now, in the Caucasus, there was no university, so seminary and gymnasium was the peak of the education. Tsarist regime did not allow a university in the Caucasus. So he's at the top of the education system locally, which is very impressive, and he's one of the best students in his class. But then he gives it all up for Revolutionary Underground. Sorry?
There's some mistake. I have an impression that there was a university in this.
You know, I would be surprised to learn that. There was no university in the Caucasus by Tsarist decree. They went elsewhere to university. Ignatashvili sent his kids either to Kiev or Tartu, Warsaw. Yeah, a lot of them went to Warsaw. Anyway, but he gave up the chance of success. He risked something. He joined the Revolutionary Underground. He began to read illegal literature. He began to try to speak to workers in small circles, 5 workers, 6 workers. And he never graduated from the seminary, and he spent almost 17 years in exile or prison. And one of the things I do in the book is not to romanticize Revolutionary Underground. I have been to Siberia myself, voluntarily, many times. And it's a life of cold and boredom and mosquitoes. It's not romantic, Revolutionary Underground. Not at all. Stalin had no money, no job. The only legal job he ever had was weatherman in Tiflis in the observatory. He recorded the temperature for a short period of time. Otherwise, he had no occupation, no trade, no money, no life, except Revolutionary Underground. So he risked something on behalf of struggle for social justice. Now you can say they were wrong, that struggle for social justice did not produce social justice. I'm not arguing Stalin's beliefs are correct. I'm only saying he had them. He had these convictions. And then I attempt to demonstrate what happens to this belief system over time, especially with Lenin and then with Stalin in power. So it's very important to take the beliefs seriously. Now, it doesn't determine everything that happens. Ideas are important, but not ideas alone. Ideas plus institutions plus geopolitics. I don't argue that Marxism caused everything. I put Marxism together with the institutions and the geopolitics. Right? So it's one of the elements in the argument. We take maybe an example. I don't know, am I good on time or over time? How much more time do I have for
Oh,
speech?
as much as you want.
5 more minutes
What
maybe?
about- Yeah, what about
Well,
5, 10
have to be
minutes?
questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also,
Little one.
Sadaqah.
No, so that was just questions.
Anyway, okay, so one of the things you have to do is you have to understand what the regime felt like, right? I tried in Magnetic Mountain, Magnitogorsk, to talk about what it felt like at the time. Atmosphere, political culture, behavior of people, vocabulary that they use, the way they think. I do the same for the regime. So I give a lot of quotations, a lot of first-hand quotations to the material to bring out what it feels like, how this regime works in practice. One of the most important things about the regime is geography of power inside the regime. So I'll give this example. So, as you know, Stalin's first office was Vozdvizhenka number 5, which is Kazakov building. Today it's architecture. The Союз архитекторов,
Музей,
что-то в этом
музей.
роде.
Музей.
Музей архитекторов.
Музей архитектуры.
Да. And so that was his first office, Vozdvizhenka number 5. First office of party apparatus was actually the Vozdvizhenka number 3, Makhovaya, where Kalinin has a plaque. That was the first office. It was one room. The entire Communist Party apparatus was one room in Vozdvizhenka number 3. Then they moved to Vozdvizhenka number 5. In January 1924, Stalin moved to Staraya Ploshchad number 4. From the month that Lenin died, and buried Lenin, Stalin moved to Staraya Ploshchad number 4. He moved to the Kremlin office in 1932. So, so-called logbook, посещение Stalina, this is Staraya Ploshchad, mostly, up until 1932. It's not the Kremlin office. He had Kremlin office, but didn't use it very much. Staraya Ploshchad was where most events, important events, took place. Sorry? You knew already? Am I wrong?
It's just there's some numbers missing.
I know. So, Staraya Ploshchad number 4, you needed a pass to get in, пропуск, and you needed for Stalin's wing a separate пропуск. So, the other members of Politburo could not walk in to the Secretariat unless they got a пропуск. This already tells you something about the regime. If Zinoviev or Trotsky needs a пропуск to visit Stalin. That's the first point. Second point, of course, Secretariat controls all the information. It's the only part Staraya Ploshchad can write to the localities and receive information from the localities. So they have big discussion, Politburo fight, who's on one side, who's on the other side, protocol, and then he goes back to Staraya Ploshchad. Does he implement the decision? Maybe. It's up to him. No check, no way to verify if Stalin has implemented the decision. No control over him whatsoever. No physical mechanisms. I don't talk about theoretical control with Stalin. I talk about physical mechanisms. Ciphers for communication with the embassy. Liaison with the militaries, Znamenka 23. Liaison with Lubyanka 2. All under Stalin. There will be a Politburo meeting and Stalin will be bored and he'll say, oh, you look up and say, 4 months ago, there was a revolt in the Caucasus. I put it down. Nobody knew, besides Stalin, that there was a revolt in the Caucasus 4 months ago. And only if he tells them do they know. Because he's controlling the information. This is 1920s. First letter I found from Stalin to Yagoda Yagodka. I know. I know him well. Kamarsad. The first letter, April 1922. Stalin is general secretary. He's already cultivating people in the Lubyanka too. Already finding them and using them as his agents. Then he finds Frauchi, who is the Swiss cheese maker, whose name is Artuzov, who's the founder of counterintelligence, because Artuzov and Yagoda hate each other. So Stalin recruits Yagoda, he recruits Artuzov, and they both send him letters. So Stalin can watch the police. He uses Yagoda to watch the whole police, and then he uses Artuzov to watch Yagoda. Already 1922. This is geography of power inside the regime. So people ask me, when was Stalin dictator? When did he become a dictator? Everybody asks me this question. Well, April 1922, Lenin appointed him general secretary, and May 1922, Lenin has a stroke. So that's it. Stalin is in power. He controls this secretariat, but there's no number one. He's incapacitated. So Stalin, de facto, has potential to create a dictatorship spring 1922 already. And you watch him, he simply performs the duties of general secretary. And this is the creation of the dictatorship. And Trotsky has to remove Stalin from power. Zinoviev and Kamenev have to remove Stalin, but they cannot remove him or do not want to remove him. Right? This is geography of power. Famous cave meeting in Kislovodsk. All of this is well documented by others and is narrated in the book. Okay, final point about example of this geography of power question. Right? Is clear so far? Boring, eh?
No.
So, one of the other questions, besides geography of power, when did Stalin get the dictatorship? It's really amazing to watch Stalin gain control over the military, even before Voroshilov is appointed, right? I am not telling the story here, but I tell that story in the book. This is why I say you have to have police and military archives to write about the dictatorship in a way that's persuasive. Just party archives is insufficient. It's very important to have the party archives, but insufficient. Okay, so Stalin is not a genius. He makes many mistakes. He doesn't understand the fascism. Understanding of fascism, very primitive. He thinks the fascism is finance capital. That is to say, it's a bourgeoisie, weakening position, dependence on finance capital. He doesn't understand that it's a right-wing movement above class in Italy in 1920s. So when I talk about Stalin's power, I'm not making him out to be greater than he is. He's very shrewd, but he's also blind to many things. Finance capital is a primitive understanding of fascism. Very primitive. Okay. Final point now about the sociopathic behavior. Right? So one of the things I try to do is not take the remembrances from 30 years later. So let's example. Somebody, Menshevik, grew up in Georgia, escaped, living in Paris or New York, remembers that when they were in school together with Stalin, Stalin was paranoid. They give an example of some behavior of Stalin. So many years later, after the Great Terror, after the murders, they look back at Stalin and they pick out things that they remember supposedly, that he was crazy, dangerous, strange, right? Well, so I say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow only in real time what they say. Meaning, what did they say in 1922? What did they say about Stalin in 1923? What did they say in 1925? those who worked closely with him, meaning the people who saw him every day, did they see him being sociopathic behavior? The answer is no, not till later. Now you can say they were stupid, they didn't understand, but these are not naive people. Kamenev knows Stalin from 1903 or 1904. Kamenev is the one who gives Stalin Russian translation of Machiavelli. 1869, Russian translation of Machiavelli. Kamenev gives to Stalin in 1904. So in 1923, Kamenev has known Stalin for 20 years. And Kamenev is a big intriguer. Krupny intrigar. But he doesn't see Stalin as a danger. In real time, in 1923, there is no evidence. In fact, the evidence is the opposite. Kamenev says that Stalin is a good hard worker and indispensable to the regime. So he's not yet sociopath according to those who work with him every day. I think this is stronger evidence than when they remember 30 years back and say, oh, do you remember when we were walking down the street and he killed a cat? That's when it began. Or do you remember his father used to beat him? My father beat me too. But so far, I didn't murder 10 million people, or whatever number you like.
Yeah, we can Britain first.
Yes. You think? That was a stroke of luck.
Yeah,
I mean,
to be Stalin.
could have come out differently. It was close. So anyway, so this is the kind of stuff I do in the book, meaning try to return to the original materials, try to present as much evidence as possible for the reader. The detail is absolutely crucial. Some people have heard this detail to painful extent. For example, they sit in my graduate seminar at Princeton University, and they've suffered this many, many years, including the detail. The barge, for example, episode, these kinds of things that are in the book. But it's the detail that gives you the history. Once you set up the framework, the big framework that I tried to set up, then everything is in the detail, because the global processes are in the minor details. At least that's my method for the history. So to sum up, to the extent that there's a new argument in the book, part of the new argument is to remove the myths and the falsehoods, which is a big job. I don't remember how in Russian, but sometimes if you have a big boat and it sits in the harbor and doesn't move, on the bottom grows barnacles. How do you say barnacles in Russian? Growth on the boat. Narost?
Ракушки.
Yes. So a lot of barnacles. So I scrape the barnacles off the ship. Scraping them all until you can see the ship again. The whole ship. Take the barnacles. This is a lot of work, but very important to scrape off the barnacles. It doesn't mean everything on the ship was a barnacle. Some things were correct. You go in the secret archive, Stalin is not going to come out now, Mother Teresa. It's not going to be parliamentary democracy, Bolshevik regime. Many things were correct. Not everything is a barnacle. But if you remove the barnacles, you begin to see a lot better. And then you add in the detail, the primary source detail, as much detail from the original sources as you can, and the reader can decide at that point. And if you don't have information that is reliable, you don't speculate. You don't insert your idea instead of the documents. You refuse to speculate, meaning you say, I think This is what Stalin was thinking. Oh, Stalin probably was thinking this. I try to avoid such insertions of my own. And when the documents are insufficient, I don't give definitive statement. People say, oh, he waffles. He doesn't give yes or no on some questions. Well, it's because documentation doesn't permit definitive answers on all questions. Finally, you make comparisons with other material when you lack material. Meaning, if you don't have enough proven information on Stalin's childhood, you bring in Kirov's childhood or Chernobyz's childhood. And if people say Stalin had a difficult childhood, you say, okay, Ivan Grozny childhood. And you can use comparisons to see who had a difficult childhood or not. In the end, you don't know exactly Stalin's childhood because the source materials are contradictory, insufficient to make a definitive statement. So you bring in examples from other people, juxtaposition. I do this a lot with questions where I run out of proven information, and so I bring in a comparison. So in the end, maybe there are mistakes, maybe my interpretation is not going to be shared by others. I'm not the missionary. You don't want to agree, you don't want to accept it, it's okay by me. I do guerrilla warfare. I go in, I sneak in when you're not looking, and I blow it up. And then I sneak out, but I may come back again. So this is my methodology. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And now the floor is open for questions. Вопросы. Пожалуйста.
Русский.
Пожалуйста.
И, пожалуйста, представляйтесь.
Георгий Дерлугян, профессор социологии, Нью-Йоркский университет. Стивен, вы сказали, что Сталин недооценил фашизм. Почему? Ведь он видел черносотенцев. Вы пишете о том, что черносотенство это фашизм. И Россия вообще должна была стать первой фашистской страной в Европе. Почему? Многие, никто не понимал фашизм очень долго. Почему он не понял?
So I'm going to answer in English, but if there's any necessity, I can try to translate myself if necessary.
Как и новость.
English would be fine.
So one of the arguments in the book, which began with Hans Roger, is that fascism was created in Tsarist Russia. And there was a strong fascist movement in Tsarist Russia, which ended up to be a failure, but had some success for a certain period of time. I believe this is correct. The Russian right wing was stronger than the left in Tsarist period, because Okranka supported the Russian right wing and fought against the Russian left. And Okranka was very successful infiltrating revolutionary movement and also successful in supporting right-wing movement. But Tsarist autocracy refused to have street politics, and so they backed off from Союз Русского Народа and other similar phenomena. So Stalin, of course, grew up with this, and he knew this, and sometimes, maybe, he fought with them, in Chiatora, for example. Okay. But right-wing movement was not a class-based movement. There were class politics inside of it, but it was above class. It was an attempt to unify people on the basis of nationalism, sometimes anti-Semitism, and sometimes xenophobia. But certainly nationalism, not always anti-Semitic, not always xenophobic, but strong nationalism. So Stalin had class-based understanding. He believed that political phenomena, like Marx and Lenin interpreted them, were based upon class movements. So fascism had to have a class component for him. There was an argument back and forth. Gugelmann, Mene Gugelmann, was in Italy writing back about this, saying it's really a very interesting phenomenon. Gugelmann is Yaroslavsky. And that it's more interesting than we think. But instead, Stalin with Zinoviev, they invent this category, social fascism. Already you see this in the newspaper, 1923, even though it's not the official policy till 1928. Interpreting fascism as a
Я читала в рецензиях, это такая шокирующая деталь, что вы считаете, что этическое завещание принадлежит, собственно, не Перу Ленина, а его писал Крупская. Каким образом это меняет ваше представление советской истории? Первый вопрос. Второй вопрос. Я вчера разговаривала с Адамом Михником, и как-то зашла речь о Бухарине и Сталине. И я ему сказала, что мне кажется, что вот в этой дуэли между Бухариным и Сталиным, продолжавшейся долгие годы, мне кажется, что Сталин фигура как-то личностно более крупная, чем Бухарин. Потому что в Бухарине есть определенная такая женскость, сентиментализм определенный, ну и множество других вещей, о которых можно говорить отдельно. И Адам со мной согласился и сказал, что да, мне кажется, что Сталин фигура гораздо крупнее, чем Бухарин. Как вы считаете, что это для вас?
Yes, so it's possible that the person could end up in power by chance. But is it possible to remain in power for 30 years by chance? It's not possible. Right? So the idea that Stalin is a great figure in a political point of view, not the moral point of view, not to share the values, but to talk about the ability to create and manage a dictatorship. He is a greater figure than anybody else around him. No question. But this is not, it doesn't mean that he's a legitimate figure. It doesn't mean that therefore I approve of what he does. Right? And Bukharin is not a great political figure. He's unfortunately a pathetic political figure. Rykov is a very serious political figure, Alexei Rykov. But Rykov had opportunity to beat Stalin, and he didn't rise to the occasion. He didn't realize the chances. Strategy, what is strategy? Strategy is taking advantage of opportunities that somebody else creates for you. Grand strategy is opportunism. Something comes to you that you didn't do, and you seize the moment, and you turn it to your advantage. This is strategy. Stalin is a brilliant strategist to seize opportunities and to turn things to his advantage. And the others around him, even though Rykov is a great political figure, he's not the strategist like Stalin. Of course, Bukharin is not even a great political figure. He's a creation of circumstances that he's unable to take advantage of. About the Zavishanya, or Testament of Lenin. So this comes from Valentin Sakharov. Valentin Sakharov, you know, 12 years ago published a book, Politicheskое Завещание Ленина.